Hey, heathens. Have you ever stopped to think about our planet? How great it is. The pretty blue oceans. All the lush green fields and plants and flowers. All the animals and creatures of the world. How could it all have come together? Some people say God had to do it. Well, is this your God? What you're looking at is called a stromatolite. And without it, this planet would be very, very different. You see, long ago, there's a lot of methane in the air. Very, very little, if any, oxygen in the air. And green oceans. Why were they green? Because they had a lot of iron in them. And when you have iron-rich water, it's green. It's just, that's the color it is. So, now we're not talking the origin of life here. Okay? Bacteria already existed. Matter of fact, blue-green algae, as it was once called, now called cyanobacteria, was already existing at this point in our little story, and which is a good thing, because without it, stromatolite would never happen. Here's how it works. See, the Earth, once it was able to produce granite, it was able to produce a rock that would stay above the water, okay, and not get washed away quite so quickly. Once that was able to happen, along the edges of the land, bacteria was able to gather and not be disturbed. Okay, so maybe sometimes it'll happen on the land, away from the water, but where a patch of water was, something like a marsh level, sea level type thing, where some water could get trapped. Bacteria could get in there, and nothing would disturb it. Very important. Nothing could disturb it. So obviously, a grazing animal or something coming around would not allow this thing to form. But what happens is the bacteria, it takes water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight, and it's able to produce its food. So, sounds kind of like photosynthesis, doesn't it? Have you ever thought about this? Is a bacteria closer to being an animal or a plant? Interesting question, huh? Bacteria and viruses have their own little section in our classification, but think about it. If evolution was true, it is. But if evolution were true, and bacteria and viruses were the first life forms, the earliest life forms to be developed, they would have some animal characteristics and some plant characteristics that would then evolve and become more and more like we see it today. So here's this algae, blue-green algae, or bacteria, that can move around like an animal, yet it uses photosynthesis, so to speak, to produce its food. Interesting, huh? Alright, it gets better. The byproduct, the waste of this bacteria, is oxygen and calcium carbonate, also known as lime, okay, as in limestone. Not lime as in the fruit, limestone. What happens is these things deposit and they create little layers, and they build upon that, and it creates this dome-shaped thing, like this. The stromatolite begins to form, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it creates these little things, and photosynthesis takes over, and it starts gathering sunlight for the bacteria, and this thing is kind of alive, kind of not. Some stromatolites have been shown to be very biological in nature, whereas others are more abiotic, non-organic, in their nature. So they're kind of half alive and half not. Living from non-living, maybe? A rock becoming a plant? What better transitional species could you ask for? Fascinating, right? Gets better. So now you have this big stromatolite producing oxygen, and these things were everywhere, everywhere, producing oxygen, pumping oxygen into our air, removing carbon dioxide, and pumping oxygen into our oceans, which is the most important. What happens when you introduce oxygen to iron? You get rust. The rust deteriorates the iron, settles down, the iron's out of the water, your green ocean now became blue. Cool, huh? Now with the iron removed, now life can permeate into the oceans and grow and become bigger and better as it was. Now, if everything I just told you was true and evolution really did happen, it did. And this is all, as I say it is, you would see stromatolites predating everything, right? And since any grazing animals coming about, you would see a sharp decline in later eras in our geological history, right? So does that happen? Well, of course it does. I wouldn't be bringing all this up if it didn't, right? What you have is Precambrian area, 2.4 billion years ago, rich carbon dioxide air, a lack of oxygen, and the multicellular life, nowhere to be found really, until the Cambrian explosion, which happens 540 million years ago. Stromatolites are there. They start declining in the Paleozoic era, and they're not very common at all by the Paleozoic era. Okay, they just start dropping off at this point, but they're all there in that zone. They start, then you get other creatures coming out of it, and so it does fit. You find stromatolites all the way back in the fossil record, and they are the earliest oxygen-producing organism that we have found. They are the link to life on Earth. Without them, our oceans would be uninhabitable, our air would be unbreathable, we wouldn't be here. So, thanks to these, you get to enjoy your life. Hooray for bacteria poop. Well, maybe it's better than the primordial ooze if that makes you feel better. But hey, don't take my word for it. Think for yourself.